Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. Each year, Hillsdale College presents the Henry Salvatori Prize for Excellence in Teaching to honor an outstanding K-12 educational program. Endowed by the late Henry Salvatori, this competition is open to all public and private schools whose teaching reflects the best traditions of Western education. Applications are reviewed by a panel of judges who select a winner based on the school's academic program, teaching of virtue, and preparation for citizenship. Atlanta Classical Academy was this year's winner. We're joined by Josh Andrew, head of school at Atlanta Classical, interviewed by Dr. Kathleen O'Toole, assistant provost for K-12 education at Hillsdale College.
Well, I'm pleased to welcome Josh Andrew of Atlanta Classical Academy. Atlanta Classical is the winner of the 2023 Salvatori Prize for Excellence in Teaching. And Josh is here to tell us a little bit about Atlanta Classical Academy. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks so much for having me.
Josh, one of the delights of my job is reading the applications for the Salvatori Prize. We had schools all over the country apply, and it's a really beautiful reminder of how much good work is going on in K-12 education. The Atlanta application was remarkable because it was beautifully written, and I suspect that you yourself may have had something to do with that.
Yes, others as well. We had a wonderful team that put a lot of time and heart into this application. I think it was a great occasion to just put into writing all of the thinking and hard work that we've been doing over the last 5 years. So really, it was a joy to do.
It's obvious from reading it how talented the faculty is. I was particularly impressed by something that you say very early on. You say it's become fashionable for schools to distinguish their curriculum by insisting that they aim to teach students how to think. And you go on to explain that this makes math and science instruction and humanities instruction compromised. Tell us a little bit about how Atlanta Classical approaches the sciences and the humanities.
Yeah. Frankly, I've always found this to be one of the most offensive things that schools claim to do sort of to their students, that is, teach them how to think. I always find that framing to be a little bit invasive and even manipulative, like people are reaching into your skull and rearranging neural pathways in order to achieve maximum efficiency of thought or something like this. And perhaps what's most worrisome is that it just doesn't seem to be a very noble vision for the human person and what he or she is capable of. And so our orientation toward teaching math and science and teaching the humanities is, as you said, not merely to teach students how to think, but to give them things that are worthy of their affections and to order their hearts towards the best things. There's this beautiful line from, I think it was from a letter that Wordsworth wrote, where he is actually writing to Samuel Coleridge, and he says, "What we have loved, others will love, and we will show them how." And I think that this is sort of the inspiration for much of our work at Atlanta Classical. We talk often about each teacher and each discipline having this responsibility of equipping their students with a particular vision of reality. I love to imagine how Mrs. Huff, who is our science teacher, for instance, walks out into nature and sees a tree and sees something profoundly different than I do as a function of her education, because she has this unique sense of, this precious ecosystem in front of her, and the trees roll within it, where I just sort of stumble out and just see this large object towering over me. And the same thing with something like math or physics, that someone like Mr. Clausen would walk outside and see boys playing catch with a football and would watch the rotation of the object through the air, and his imagination would be inspired and brought to life. And the dull-witted among us just sees this pigskin going back and forth. And so, the function of an education then is to bring reality to life, to cause us to fall in love again with the things that we see in our world. And it's why we place such a premium at Atlanta Classical in speaking about this work, not merely as a kind of exercise in critical thinking, but an exercise in loving.
What does that mean for classroom instruction? What do the teachers do to help students get into this place of really learning to think and see kind of on their own, rather than having their minds rearranged by the teachers themselves?
Sure. What's interesting about this question is that you immediately see how there's a kind of risk of something like project-based learning when you pull on this too hard, right? If the idea is that the teacher is not responsible for direct instruction, perhaps then we're saying, oh, so the kid just sort of goes out into nature and plays around and learns beautiful things, and the teacher is just sort of observing from the side, and through encounter and exploration and education comes to be. And this is not what we're talking about, right? There's this really kind of delicate interplay between a teacher creating occasions for wonder, right? For amazement, for awe. And oftentimes we think that this is appropriate for the beginning of class, right? This is the way that we want for every one of our classes at Atlanta Classical to begin. A moment of wonder, a moment of profound curiosity, even of disturbance sometimes, that leaves a student with a series of questions that over the next 30, 40 minutes of class, the teacher sort of gradually begins to untangle. And so I think the way that we make learning come to life is through excellent questions, and is, beginning in wonder. One of our finest students who graduated in our first class, who's actually back now at Atlanta Classical this year teaching math and English to our middle school students, wrote in her senior thesis about this moment in Hamlet, where he's describing being harrowed by fear and wonder by the sight of the ghost of his father. And she described this as the moment when Hamlet was prepared for education, right? As a consequence of having his soul sort of split open by the terror and magnitude of a thing, he was positioned to learn. And we take this as a kind of lesson for every teacher. Not that we, seek to terrify every single one of our students for the first 5 minutes of class, but perhaps that does happen. But we know that moments like that create occasions for learning, because suddenly you're not just pursuing something for the sake of being able to repeat it, but because you are yearning to understand and to know the thing. So I think at the core of it, again, is beginning every lesson in wonder.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And one thing I've seen in the classrooms at Atlanta and in many of our best schools is the teachers ask dozens upon dozens of questions in every class period. But they're thoughtful questions. They're carefully constructed questions that are geared to, that particular class, those particular people in the room.
Yeah, I think one thing that we are in conversation frequently with new teachers about is the fact that you can't rely on yourself to come up with the perfect question in the moment. And the best lesson plans oftentimes look like carefully sequenced questions that cover the full 50 minutes of a given class or however long your period is. And I think many teachers probably trust their instincts and their own intellectual prowess too much to assume, oh, I'll know exactly what to ask at the right moment. And this is something that you certainly develop in time. But we agonize over the kinds of questions that we write in advance, knowing that this is really the core of every lesson.
Let's go back to this question of perplexity or wondering and mastery. So you say that, a big part of your job as a teacher is to help the students learn how to wonder and to even put them in a state of perplexity before beginning to learn something. When I was in graduate school, I learned that the word perplexity comes from the Greek word for being caught in a maze and not being able to see the way out. And that's a very kind of frustrating, confusing position to be in, this darkness. Seems to me like with some things that we teach in K through 12 schools, we do want to find our way out of the darkness and seek mastery. But with other things, mastery is not the goal. And if we feel that we have mastered something, for example, one of the books in the high school curriculum, Moby Dick, that's a sign of arrogance or excessive confidence. So do you have thoughts about that? What are the areas of the curriculum in which we're seeking mastery, and what are the areas in which we're not seeking mastery?
I do think that there's just this beautiful opportunity for teachers to model the intellectual humility of returning to the same discipline year after year and being filled with more questions with each encounter, right? This is what the teacher does, that we go back to a work by Dostoevsky or by Shakespeare and teach it for the 10th and 11th time and only come away with more questions. And that's something that we actively narrate to our students at Atlanta Classical. We encourage our teachers to sort of describe how their own encounter with the material is renewed each year, and that there aren't just a kind of limited number of questions or facts that they seek to, as you say, master by the end of a given academic year. Certainly in the lower grades and in something like literacy essentials, right? These programs where students are acquiring the basics of literacy and numeracy skills, there is a kind of mastery that makes all other learning possible. We want to furnish students with something like the technology of language that allows them to engage in more intense inquiry that will lead them into perhaps questions that there aren't easy solutions to. But I think that's a tension throughout an education, right? And perhaps the most exciting moment in any year is where you kind of pass from, all right, students, the orientation of this class is toward mastering these concepts, to, oh my, we're just doing this for its own sake right now. And this isn't something that is going to be, tested at the end of the year, but this is something that we are just endlessly curious about and want to hear more about. One thing that I love that happens in many of our classes, particularly in our English classes, is that our teachers begin each class just by reading poetry or short stories or novels that they love that aren't actually technically part of the curriculum, and they'll just read a page or two each day. And the effect of this is that it sort of sets the tone and the purpose for the day, that what we do at Atlanta Classical is, again, not just toward mastering or memorizing a set of facts, but it is loving something for its own sake. So with my seniors right now, I'm reading this beautiful little book called A Separate Piece by John Knowles. And we almost never give commentary on it. They will never take a quiz on it. They'll never have a Socratic discussion on it even. I just sort of read 2 pages and let the book linger over the class for the 45 minutes that we then engage in discussion on Camus or whatever it is that we're reading. But I think that there are all these ways in which teachers can kind of sprinkle in these little notes of how it is that we are oriented toward learning, not just mastery of facts, but a kind of beholding of beautiful things.
Yeah, and it's truly a beautiful place when you get to see it in person. Josh, it's obvious from hearing you speak about it and from visiting the school itself that it's a happy place, it's a well-functioning place. Tell me, it's such a different way of going about K through 12 schooling than the way that we see in most American schools. How do you know that it's working?
Yeah. 2 stories come to mind, and I'll share both. One was a conversation with a new student that happened at the end of last week with one of our principals, where she approached him and he was asking her how her week had gone. She's brand new. She's in high school, transitioning to a classical school, and 10th grade especially is just very challenging. And she said, man, teachers love working here. They all seem just amazed by what they're talking about. They're just enthralled by this subject. And there's just a spirit of joy. At my old school, my teachers hated their jobs, and their hatred just made us want to make them hate their jobs even more, right? It just sort of creates this vicious cycle of, hey, if you're going to hate being here, two of us can play that game, and I'll make the situation even worse for us. So there's that's some kind of marker of things going well, right? That a new student walks in and says, this place is defined by joy. There's a kind of lightheartedness, even a playfulness about this work that has come to embody an education at Atlanta Classical. I'll admit, even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about those parents that have reached out to us in the last couple of weeks to say, you're giving so much homework. What are you trying to do to my child? So know that we're not some perfect place that is sunshine and rainbows and no one struggles. There's much work that goes into the joy. A second story, though, that reminds me of sort of a proof point for us was one of our recent college graduates, actually. She went to Georgia Tech and studied neuroscience. During her midterm exams, she was talking to a group of other classmates at Georgia Tech and was saying, man, isn't this material just beautiful? Don't you just want to sit and talk about this and sort of reflect on these things forever? And another student at Tech looked at her and said, did you go to Atlanta Classical? And Georgia Tech is a massive school, and I think we have probably 4 or 5 students there in total. But that's the reputation of ACA is a thing that brings me basically unending joy. That wonder and ACA are linked makes me just incredibly proud.
Yeah, that's something to be proud of for sure. So you talked a little bit about the teachers. What does it take to be a teacher at a classical school like Atlanta Classical? And what is your job as principal of the school in relation to the teachers?
I think the first thing is that they love their subject and feel a kind of urgency, even at times like a manic urgency about the importance of their students encountering their subject, that they can articulate with some specificity the role of their discipline in the moral and intellectual framework or in the moral and intellectual development, rather, of their students. That matters. That's one of the first questions we ask. We want them to be sort of actively pursuing the development of their own education and just in love with their work, right? That's where it begins. And to make that possible, I think the administration has to create an environment that allows for the nurture and the development of our own teachers' intellectual curiosity, whether that's creating opportunities for pursuing graduate degrees or attending conferences, right? The kinds of things that you might hear happening at the college level. We're finding that oftentimes the teachers that make their way to us are those that have spent time teaching at the university level and are very serious about their own development, their own professional development. And so we've decided that it's incumbent upon us as part of our model to be creating occasion for that and devoting serious resources to it. Another element is that we take teaching really seriously, and we want our teachers to be incredible at their work. Very often, the administration is in conversation about how we dignify and honor the teaching profession. And one of the ways that we've committed to doing it over the last couple of years is just sort of intensifying our rhythm of observation. Every teacher at Atlanta Classical gets observed a minimum of 8 times every single school year. And I think at first this can feel a little bit punitive and intimidating to have administrators coming into your classrooms this much. But what it really shows is our dedication to this work. And we find that we're attracting the kind of professionals who want to know that their administrators care about what they're teaching and how they're teaching it. And so it's sort of this coming together of teachers who are brought to life by their discipline, who can describe its importance and are animated by their discipline, and that administrators who honor that love and who are looking for ways to both support them and challenge them to kind of continue in their growth. I think we are just doubling down in our conviction that excellent teaching is at the core of making our school enduringly great. And so we want to create as many structures as possible to make teachers as good at teaching as possible.
Yeah, well, it's obvious that your efforts with teachers are really paying off. You cite a 2022 study by Merrimack College and Ed Week, which shows that nationwide, only 12% of teachers feel very satisfied with their jobs. Meanwhile, at ACA, 93% of the teachers indicated that they were satisfied or very satisfied with their jobs. Faculty happiness, I think, is the key to student success. Let me ask you one final question, Josh, and that question is, this approach to K-12 education sounds really hard. Is it actually possible for average students to thrive in a school with a curriculum like this?
Yes. One of the things that I think that every ed policy person and educational bureaucrat, whatever, struggles to describe is the power of the human will and the potential of the human imagination. So many of our conversations about education sort of frame the work as, well, we're going to have these smart people that sit behind the scenes and try to kind of manipulate things so that we can achieve optimal outcomes for students. And the thing that we never consider is the student himself, right? And their own will and their own capacity for transformational growth, the point at which they encounter something that is worthwhile. And so again and again, I've seen the most average students who struggle profoundly in their earliest years at Atlanta Classical through the care and diligence and kind of constant attention of teachers gradually turn to love this work and to believe that this mission of forming knowledgeable and virtuous citizens of our country is a worthy one. The author Marilyn Robinson describes this moment when she was in kindergarten of her kindergarten teacher saying, "You only have one mind, and so you need to learn how to live with it." This rings true in our work at ACA, right? No matter what your sort of education background is when you come into this place, no matter what your level of talent or intelligence might be, every mind that comes into this place is sacred. And we aim to fill it with things that will nourish it and allow it to grow for the rest of its life. And again, when the human heart, when the human mind alights upon something that's worthy, inspiration happens, transformation happens. I know that these are like very theoretical and kind of vague terms for describing this process. And certainly there are more sort of quantitative and practical measures to describe the kinds of transformations that happen. But absolutely, this education is one that is good for all kids because it offers a mission that is worthy of the human person.
Well, thank you, Josh, and congratulations on all of your very worthy work at Atlanta Classical Academy.
Thanks very much.
That was Dr. Kathleen O'Toole, Assistant Provost for K-12 Education at Hillsdale College, and Josh Andrew, Head of School at Atlanta Classical Academy. I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.